The year is 2600 BCE. You're standing in Mohenjo-daro, the largest city on Earth. Around you, 40,000 people go about their lives in streets laid out on a perfect grid. The house beside you has a flush toilet connected to a citywide sewage system that Rome won't match for another 2,400 years. The granary ahead distributes surplus grain across a civilization that spans 1.5 million square kilometers. The workshops are full. The docks are busy. The writing system that coordinates all of it is being pressed into wet clay by scribes who have no idea they are among the last people who will ever read it. And then, within 2 generations, it is all gone. No invasion, no fire, no bodies, just silence. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, and it is one of 10 advanced societies that erased themselves from history without a satisfying explanation. 10 civilizations, 10 vanishings. Some left ruins, some left nothing at all, and all of them left a question that archaeology has never convincingly answered. What happened? 1. The City of Silence. The Indus Valley Civilization vanished. Circa 1900 BC. You are in Mohenjo-daro, and something is wrong. Not with the city. The city is perfect. That is exactly what's wrong. The streets are too ordered, the drainage too sophisticated, the standardization of brick sizes across 1,000 settlements too precise for anything built this early. And when the British archaeologist R.D. Banerjee uncovered this place in 1922, he found something that stopped him cold. Skeletons in the streets. Not piled, not burned, just lying there, some in clusters, some alone, in the postures of people who sat down and did not get up. No weapons beside them, no evidence of massacre. They looked, as one excavation report noted, like people who had simply run out of time. The Indus Valley Civilization was the largest of the 4 great ancient civilizations, surpassing Egypt and Mesopotamia in both geographic extent and urban sophistication. At its peak, it encompassed over 1,000 settlements across what is now Pakistan, northwest India, and Afghanistan. Its cities featured indoor plumbing, standardized weights and measures, and a writing system used consistently across the entire civilization. Then, centered around 1900 BCE, the cities emptied. The grain stores closed. The writing stopped. The mainstream explanation is climate change. Around 2100 BCE, a centuries-long drought struck South Asia. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system, which watered the civilization's heartland, began to fail. Without water, agriculture collapsed. People dispersed eastward toward the Ganges plain, where rainfall remained reliable. The civilization didn't die, the argument goes. It migrated and transformed. But the writing system argues against a simple dispersal. Despite 4,000 known inscriptions, the Indus script has never been deciphered, and more critically, it abruptly stops. If 2 million people relocated, why did their written language vanish entirely rather than survive in the new settlements? Civilizations that migrate carry their languages. The Indus script left no descendants, no evolved form, no trace in the regions where the population supposedly went. And a 2016 skeletal analysis at the site of Rakhigarhi revealed that the final generations of Harappan people showed severe physiological stress markers. The biological signature not of gradual adaptation, but of collapse. What happened to the writing? Why have 4,000 inscriptions resisted every decipherment attempt for a century? What lies beneath the estimated 1,000 unexcavated Harappan sites that no archaeologist has yet opened? And if the civilization simply migrated, why does no successor culture remember it? 2. The empty stone thrones. The Maya vanished circa 900 C. You are a commoner in Tikal in 850 CE, and the smoke from the sacrificial altars has gone cold. The god kings have not appeared for 3 market cycles. The great jaguar temple above you still stands, its limestone blocks fitted without mortar to tolerances that modern engineers find difficult to explain. Your people have tracked the movements of Venus with more astronomical precision than any European civilization will manage for another 600 years. The jade is still on the table. The pottery is still in the kiln. You pick up your children and walk into the jungle, and you do not come back. At its peak, classic Maya civilization supported an estimated 2,000 cities and a population of between 8 and 10 million people across the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. The urban centers of Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Caracol were not primitive settlements. They were sophisticated metropolises. With monumental architecture, hydraulic systems, advanced mathematics, and a calendar more accurate than the Julian calendar. Europe was still using 1,000 years later. Between 800 and 950 CE, the southern lowland cities collapsed almost entirely. Within a century, populations that had numbered in the millions had shrunk to scattered villages. The mainstream explanation is a convergence of factors: a severe prolonged drought confirmed by lake sediment cores from the Yucatan, agricultural soil exhaustion from intensive farming, political fragmentation as the city-state system broke down into constant warfare, and the collapse of the long-distance trade networks that sustained urban economies. No single cause, the argument goes, but a cascade in which each failure accelerated the others. The drought data is strong. The sediment cores from Lake Chichancanub come from a series of severe dry periods between 800 and 1000 CE, correlating directly with the abandonment sequence. But the timing within individual cities is where the explanation frays. Copan's population began declining before the drought peak. Caracol collapsed while its agricultural systems were still partially functional, and the northern cities, Chichen Itza and Uxmal, survived and even flourished into the 10th and 11th centuries under the same climatic conditions that supposedly destroyed the south. The drought explains stress. It does not explain why some cities died and others thrived under identical pressure. And then there is the calendar. The Maya long count calendar, which tracked cycles of 5,125 years, ended its 13th Byaktun on a date corresponding to December 2012 in our own calendar. The classic collapse happened at roughly the midpoint of that cycle. Whether that means anything is a question the Maya themselves never answered in any surviving text. They left 15,000 known inscriptions, and not one of them explains why they left. Did the Maya know the collapse was coming? What determined which cities survived the drought and which did not? And why, across 15,000 inscriptions, recording astronomical observations, royal dynasties, and agricultural cycles, did no Maya scribe leave a single account of what it felt like to watch their civilization end? 3. The Kingdom of Giants. Aksum, vanished, circa 940 C. You are in Aksum in 500 CE, and the empire around you is one of the 4 great powers of the ancient world. The Roman historian Mani placed it alongside Rome, Persia, and China. Your gold coins circulate as far as India. Your Red Sea trade routes connect the Mediterranean to the subcontinent. And above your city rise obelisks of granite, cut from single stones, the largest monolithic structures ever erected by any civilization. The tallest stands 33 meters and weighs 520 tons. It was quarried 4 kilometers away, transported across broken terrain, and raised without mechanized equipment by a civilization that, 4 centuries from now, will collapse so completely that the outside world will forget it existed for 1,000 years. The Axumite Empire, at its peak, was extraordinary by any measure. It was the first sub-Saharan African state to mint its own coins. It was among the earliest empires to adopt Christianity as a state religion, doing so in the 4th century CE, centuries before most of Europe. Its merchants connected 3 continents. Its architecture produced engineering feats that remain only partially explained. And then, between roughly 700 and 940 CE, it contracted, weakened, and died. The final act attributed in Ethiopian tradition to a semi-legendary queen named Yodit. He is said to have burned Axum to the ground in a single night of fire. The mainstream explanation centers on the rise of Islam in the 7th century CE. Islamic expansion transformed the Red Sea trade network. The Axumites found themselves increasingly isolated from former trading partners, cut off from coastal access by hostile neighbors, and unable to sustain the economic base that had funded their monumental building programs. Deforestation and soil degradation compounded agricultural decline. The empire simply ran out of the resources that had made it powerful. The trade disruption explanation is credible, but incomplete. Empires deprived of trade routes restructure. They shift economies, seek new routes, adapt. Axum didn't adapt. It vanished from international consciousness so thoroughly that when Portuguese explorers reached Ethiopia in the 15th century, they encountered a Christian kingdom that local tradition insisted had been great once, but could point to almost nothing that explained how or why it had fallen. The obelisks are still there. The largest, the obelisk of Axum, was looted by Mussolini's forces in 1937 and only returned to Ethiopia in 2008. The engineering required to cut, transport, and erect a 520-ton monolith with ancient technology has not been definitively replicated by experimental archaeology. We know it happened. We cannot fully explain how. And then there is the matter of what Axum claims to be guarding. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum has maintained, for over 1,000 years, that it houses the original Ark of the Covenant. A single guardian monk, whose identity is kept secret, is the only person permitted to see it. No outside verification has ever been allowed. For a collapsed empire, the institutional continuity of that guardianship across 14 centuries of isolation is itself an impossible fact. How did Axumite engineers raise 520-ton monoliths from single pieces of granite? Why did Axum fail to adapt its trade-based economy rather than simply collapse? And what has been guarded in that church in an unbroken chain of custody for 1,400 years? 4. The ghosts of Petra. The Nabataeans vanished circa 400 C. You are a merchant arriving at Petra in 100 CE, and the city carved into the red rock around you is the most improbable metropolis on Earth. The Nabataeans built it in the middle of one of the most hostile deserts in the ancient world, and they did not merely survive there, they mastered it. An engineering system of cisterns, channels, and ceramic pipes hidden in the cliff faces collected every drop of rainwater from storms that passed perhaps twice a year, storing enough to sustain a city of 30,000 people in conditions where 30 people should not have been able to live. Their trade caravans carried incense, spice, and silk between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. They grew wealthy enough to carve a treasury into a sandstone cliff face so precisely that it still stands 2,000 years later, without a single stone having shifted. And then Rome absorbed them, and within 3 centuries, the Nabataeans, as a distinct people, had dissolved so completely that their very identity disappeared. The Nabataean kingdom was formally annexed by Rome in 106 CE, becoming the province of Arabia Petraea. And this is where the standard historical account ends the story. Absorbed into empire, assimilated into Roman provincial culture and of entry. But the Nabataeans were not a small tribe. They were a sophisticated urban civilization with their own script, which became the direct ancestor of the Arabic alphabet used by 1.8 billion people today. Civilizations absorbed by Rome don't typically erase themselves. They leave hybrid cultures, syncretized religions, and identifiable populations. The Nabataeans left an alphabet and a canyon full of carved rock. The mainstream explanation is gradual assimilation. Under Roman administration, the Nabataean elite adopted Roman customs. The language shifted. Intermarriage diluted distinct identity, and over 3 centuries, a people became a province. The water engineering that sustained Petra became harder to maintain as Roman administrative priorities shifted, and Petra's importance as a trade hub declined when Roman maritime routes bypassed the overland caravan network. The city shrank, and its people dispersed into the broader Roman and later Byzantine world. But the water engineering complicates the simple assimilation story. The Nabataean hydraulic system was so sophisticated that modern hydrologists studying flash flood management in arid regions have traveled to Petra specifically to study it. The system didn't just collect rainwater, and it managed the destructive force of flash floods, redirecting water that could destroy the canyon into storage. That kind of institutional engineering knowledge doesn't vanish through assimilation. It gets written down, transmitted, preserved. It disappeared with the Nabataeans entirely and was not recovered. Some researchers have proposed that the Nabataeans didn't assimilate into Rome, but retreated deeper into the desert, becoming the Bedouin confederations whose descendants still live in the region today. Genetic studies of some Jordanian Bedouin populations have shown markers consistent with ancient Levantine populations that predate the Arab expansion of the 7th century. The Nabataeans may not have vanished. They may have gone somewhere. Rome couldn't follow and simply stopped being Nabataean in any way that left a paper trail. Where did the Nabataean water engineering knowledge go? And why was it not preserved in Roman or Byzantine technical literature? Did the Nabataeans retreat into the desert rather than assimilate? And if so, where are their descendants now? And what is still carved into the cliffs of Petra that archaeologists have not yet excavated, given that an estimated 85% of the city remains underground? 5. The City of the Sun. Cahokia vanished circa 1400 CE. You are standing on Monk's Mound in 1100 CE. And the city spreading out below you is larger than London. The Great Plaza at the mound's base could contain 45 football fields. The wooden palisade enclosing the central precinct stretches for nearly 2 miles. The circular arrangements of massive cedar posts, aligned to solar solstices and equinoxes with an accuracy that modern astronomers have verified with GPS, rise from the floodplain like a calendar made of trees. Cahokia is home to 20,000 people. It is the most sophisticated pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. And by 1400 CE, it is completely empty, and the people who encounter it centuries later have no idea who built it. Cahokia was the urban center of the Mississippian culture, which at its peak extended a network of mound-building communities from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. It was a true city, socially stratified, politically organized, sustained by long-distance trade in copper, shells, and prestige goods across a continent. Monk's Mound, its central pyramid, has a base larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was built entirely from hand-carried earth, basket by basket, over generations. Then the city depopulated between roughly 1300 and 1400 CE, and the mounds slowly returned to grass. The mainstream explanation combines environmental and social collapse. Soil depletion from intensive agriculture around the city reduced its carrying capacity. Flooding events on the Mississippi River damaged the agricultural hinterland. Political instability increased conflict with surrounding communities. The population dispersed gradually over 2 centuries into smaller settlements downstream. But Cahokia is a mystery, in a way the standard explanation doesn't address. When European explorers and later settlers encountered the mounds, the indigenous peoples of the region, the Osage, the Illiniwek, the Potawatomi, had no oral tradition connecting them to this place. None of them claimed it as ancestral. None of them had a story about who built the largest city in pre-Columbian North America. A metropolis of 20,000 people, the Woodhenge calendar, the 2-mile palisade, the 100 mounds, and the people living within sight of it a century later had no memory of any of it. Isotopic analysis of human remains at Cahokia has revealed something that deepens the mystery further. A significant portion of the population were not local. They had grown up elsewhere and migrated to the city, drawn from hundreds of miles away. Cahokia was functioning as a pilgrimage center, a place people traveled to from across the continent, and then all of them, locals and pilgrims alike, left, not to any identifiable single destination, just dispersed and took their memory with them. How does a city of 20,000 people disappear so thoroughly that neighbors living within sight of its mounds a century later have no account of who built them? What drew pilgrims from hundreds of miles away to a city in the Illinois floodplain who is buried in the mass graves beneath Monk's Mound, sacrificed in events that archaeologists have documented but not explained? And why did the people who left take every memory with them? 6. The Neolithic Pompeii, Skara Brae, vanished circa 2500 BC. You are a farmer in the Orkney Islands in 2500 BCE, and the stone village around you is more comfortable than most of medieval Europe will manage for another 4,000 years. Your bed is stone, your shelves are stone, your drainage system is stone. The house you are sitting in has been here for 200 years and will stand for 4,000 more. Outside, the wind is doing something it has never done before. The sand is moving in a way that means it will not stop. And you grab your necklace from the stone shelf, the one you made yourself, the one you wear every day, and you leave it. You run. You never come back. Skara Brae is a Neolithic village on the Orkney Islands of Scotland, buried by a sand dune around 2500 BCE and lost for 4,000 years until a storm uncovered it in 1850. What the storm revealed stopped archaeologists cold. The village was preserved almost perfectly, stone furniture intact, hearths in place, decorated pottery still on the shelves, and personal ornaments, the kind of objects people instinctively grab when they flee, were found lying exactly where their owners had last set them down. It was, in the words of one excavation report, like walking into a house whose occupants had stepped out 5 minutes ago. The mainstream explanation is an environmental emergency. A catastrophic storm or rapidly advancing sand dune forced an evacuation so sudden that there was no time to collect possessions. The abandonment was not planned. It was a panicked response to an immediate threat. The excellent preservation is simply the result of the sand doing quickly what it did, sealing the village in an anaerobic environment before decay could take hold. The preservation itself supports this. But the specific objects left behind introduce a question the emergency evacuation model doesn't fully answer. Personal ornaments, beads, pendants, carved items, are small, lightweight, and the first things a person grabs in any emergency. They were found untouched, not scattered near doorways as if dropped during flight, neatly in place, as if their owners set them down for a moment and were interrupted before they could pick them back up. The pattern looks less like panicked flight and more like a departure from which the owners expected to return. What is also strange is that Skara Brae was not abandoned and then swallowed by sand. The sequence appears to be simultaneous, the abandonment and the burial happening together, and which means the people who left did not return even after the storm passed, even to recover their belongings, even to take the ornaments off the shelf. Whatever happened was permanent enough that no one came back on a clear day to collect what they had left behind. What was the Skara Brae community running from in enough haste to leave personal ornaments behind? Why did no one return to collect them when the immediate danger passed? And what other Neolithic villages remain sealed beneath the islands of northern Scotland, waiting for another storm to uncover them? 7. The Cliff Dwellers. The ancestral Puebloans vanished circa 1300 CE. You're climbing a wooden ladder in 1270 CE into a palace built directly into the face of a cliff in what is now Colorado. The rooms above you are stacked 4 stories high in an overhang of sandstone. The architecture is precise enough that the walls have stood for 200 years without mortar failure. The granaries beside you are full. The fires are cold. Your people have lived in this fortress for 7 generations. The location was chosen because nothing could reach you here. No raiding party, no predator, no force of nature could approach without being seen from 300 feet above the canyon floor. And within a single decade, every single person has gone south, and they never told their descendants why. The ancestral Puebloans built one of the most sophisticated pre-Columbian civilizations north of Mexico. The roads of Chaco Canyon, 400 miles of them, 30 feet wide, laser straight, built without wheeled vehicles or draft animals, connected a regional network of at least 150 great house communities across the Colorado Plateau. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde were engineering masterpieces, built in positions of extraordinary natural defense. The astronomical alignments of their architecture have been confirmed by modern survey. These were not primitive people seeking shelter. They were sophisticated architects making deliberate choices. The mainstream explanation combines drought and violence. Tree ring data confirms a severe drought beginning in 1276 CE that lasted 23 years. Without reliable rainfall, maize agriculture failed. Simultaneously, skeletal evidence from the period shows a dramatic increase in violent trauma, and suggesting raiding between communities competing for dwindling resources. People moved south and east into the Rio Grande Valley, where water remained available. The drought data is the strongest single-cause evidence on this list. The tree ring record is unambiguous, but the ancestral Puebloans had survived droughts before. Multiple severe dry periods are recorded in the tree ring data across their 700-year occupation of the region, and they persisted through all of them. What was different about this one? And the cliff dwellings themselves complicate the resource collapse model. You do not build a 4-story palace into the face of a cliff at a moment of civilizational crisis. The Mesa Verde cliff dwellings were constructed in the century before the abandonment, suggesting a society still capable of monumental architecture even as the drought was beginning. They built their most defensible homes and then left them. Oral traditions of the Hopi and Zuni peoples, and believed to be descendants of the ancestral Puebloans, do not describe the departure as a desperate flight from drought. They describe it as a spiritual directive. The people left, the stories say, because something had gone wrong in the covenant between the people and the land. The shaman said to go. Whatever that means in historical terms, the descendants preserved a memory of intentional departure, not catastrophe. Why build your most defensible homes at the exact moment things got difficult and then abandon them? What determined that this drought, unlike every previous drought, would end 700 years of continuous occupation? And why do the oral traditions of the descendants describe a deliberate spiritual departure rather than a collapse? 8. The Drowning City. The Khmer Empire vanished circa 1431 CE. You are a monk in Angkor, Wat in 1200 CE, and the city around you is the largest urban complex in human history. 1 million people, 1,000 square kilometers. The hydraulic network of reservoirs, canals, and moats that keeps the city alive is so sophisticated that modern hydrologists are still mapping it. The temple you live in took 30 years to build and covers an area greater than Vatican City. It is the largest religious structure ever constructed on Earth. And within 200 years, the entire population will be gone. The canals will be silted. the jungle will have reclaimed the stone. And when the French naturalist Henri Mouhot stumbles upon it in 1860, he will write in his journal that the ruins are grander than anything left by Greece or Rome, and that he cannot bring himself to believe that ordinary men built it. The Khmer Empire, at its peak, was the dominant power in Southeast Asia. The hydraulic city at Angkor distributed water across nearly 1,000 square kilometers through a network of reservoirs called barays, some large enough to be visible from space today. This system allowed year-round rice cultivation at a scale that supported population densities comparable to modern cities. It was the engine of the empire, and it was what the empire failed to save. The mainstream explanation is hydraulic collapse compounded by military pressure. A sediment analysis of Angkor's canals shows that by the 14th century the system was failing. Deforestation of surrounding hills had increased runoff and siltation. Critical infrastructure went unmaintained as the empire's political attention shifted to the Thai threat from the west. Catastrophic floods in the late 14th century damaged what drought then finished. The Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya sacked Angkor in 1431, Epic E. The Khmer court relocated south to Phnom Penh, and Angkor was left behind. And the hydraulic failure evidence is compelling. But the scale of what was left behind is what resists easy explanation. You do not abandon a million-person city the way you abandon a village. The logistics of moving that population, the institutional decision-making required, the sheer coordination involved, none of it is documented. There is no Khmer account of the decision to leave Angkor. No royal decree, no religious proclamation, no inscription marking the end. And the city was simply not there anymore. And then, LiDAR surveys conducted since 2012 revealed that Angkor was vastly larger than anyone had believed, with suburban and agricultural infrastructure extending far beyond the temple complex, an urban footprint so enormous that it had been hiding in plain sight beneath the jungle canopy for 6 centuries. And archaeologists had been studying a fraction of this civilization for 160 years, and didn't know the extent of the rest of it until a laser mounted on a helicopter finally showed them. What else is still hidden beneath the jungle surrounding Angkor? Why is there no surviving Khmer account of the decision to abandon the largest city on Earth? And how did a civilization capable of building the largest religious structure in human history lose the institutional memory of having done so within 2 centuries of leaving? 9. The Toppled Gods. Easter Island, vanished, circa 1600 CE. You are a Dutch explorer, stepping onto Rapa Nui on Easter Sunday 1722, and what you see makes no sense. Hundreds of massive stone figures, some standing, most toppled, line the coast, their backs to the sea, and you're watching an interior that is almost entirely treeless. The tools used to carve them are still lying at the bottom of the quarry, abandoned mid-cut, as if the workers set them down during a lunch break 200 years ago and never returned. The civilization that built these figures, some weighing 80 tons, and moved them miles across an island with no trees for levers and no animals large enough to haul them, is gone. In its place is a population a fraction of its former size, and living in a culture so transformed that the knowledge of how any of it was done has completely vanished. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, located 2,300 miles from the nearest continental landmass. The Polynesian settlers who arrived around 300 to 800 CE built a civilization that at its peak carved and transported approximately 1,000 moai. Monolithic stone figures averaging 13 feet tall and 14 tons, with some reaching 33 feet and 80 tons, across the island using methods that experimental archaeologists have partially replicated but never definitively confirmed at full scale. The quarry at Rano Raraku contains 400 unfinished moai, abandoned in place. Something stopped the project permanently. The mainstream explanation is ecological and social collapse. The island's original palm forest was steadily cleared for agriculture and for the log rollers and rope used to move the moai. But by roughly 1600 CE, the island was almost entirely deforested. Without trees, the soil eroded, agricultural productivity collapsed, the canoes needed for deep-sea fishing could no longer be built, and the population crashed from an estimated peak of 15,000 to roughly 3,000. Competition for dwindling resources produced warfare and the toppling of rival clans moai. European contact in 1722 arrived at a civilization already destroyed from within. The deforestation data is strong. Pollen cores from the island confirm the near-complete loss of the palm forest. But the mechanism of moai transport remains genuinely unresolved. The walking theory, rocking the statues upright on their curved bases using ropes, requiring only a small team, has been demonstrated at small scale. Whether it works at full scale for an 80-ton figure across 90 miles of uneven terrain has not been convincingly shown. And the unfinished moai in the quarry are a detail that defies any managed decline scenario. These weren't abandoned because resources ran out gradually. They were abandoned mid-process, suddenly, as if the decision to stop was made on a specific day. One further detail. Among the artifacts of Rapa Nui is a writing system called rongorongo, found on 26 wooden tablets, none of which have been deciphered. It may be the only independently invented writing system in Oceania, and every person who could read it was dead before anyone from outside thought to ask what it said. What do the rongorongo tablets say? What specifically caused the moai project to stop mid-cut rather than wind down gradually? And on an island this remote and this thoroughly studied, why do the two most important questions, how the statues moved and what the writing means, remain completely unanswered? 10. The silence after the wedding. The Greenland Norse. Vanished, circa 1408 C. You are in the eastern settlement of Norse Greenland in 1408 CE, and you are attending a wedding. The church is cold, but it is standing. The guests are dressed for the occasion. Someone is keeping a record, because this event will be written down and sent to Iceland, where it will be preserved, and it will become the last written evidence that any Norse person was alive in Greenland. After this wedding, after these guests go home and close their doors, there is nothing. No distress letter, no account of famine, no record of ships arriving to find survivors, no bodies. Just the neatly arranged personal possessions in empty farmhouses and 4 centuries of silence. The Norse Greenland settlements were established by Eric the Red in 985 CE, and at their peak comprised perhaps 5,000 people across the eastern and western settlements on Greenland's southwestern coast. For nearly 400 years they maintained farms, a bishop's seat, multiple churches, sea and regular contact with Iceland and Norway. They traded walrus ivory to European courts, paid tithes to the church, and were visited by ships on a reasonably regular basis. The western settlement was abandoned around 1350 CE. The eastern settlement lasted until sometime in the early 1400s. Then both were gone. The mainstream explanation is a catastrophic convergence. The little ice age cooling made Greenland's marginal farmland increasingly unviable. The European market for walrus ivory collapsed when elephant ivory from Africa became more widely available, removing the settlement's primary trade commodity. The Black Death devastated Norway, which administered the settlements, reducing both the ships sent and the institutional attention paid. The Thule Inuit, arriving from the north with technology far better adapted to deteriorating Arctic conditions, may have come into conflict with the Norse settlers. And any one of these factors would have been serious. Together they were overwhelming. Each individual factor is documented and credible. But the absence of any evacuation record is the detail that refuses to resolve. Ships still visited Greenland in the early 1400s. The 1408 wedding was attended and documented. If 5,000 people were slowly starving and freezing at the end of the world, Why did no one write it down? Why did no ship arrive to find survivors begging them for passage? The Norse were a maritime people who had colonized Iceland and Greenland and briefly North America. Getting on ships when circumstances became untenable was culturally encoded into who they were. They did not stay and die quietly. Except, apparently, this once. Archaeological evidence from the final layers of the eastern settlement shows the Norse were eating their dogs in the end, and their cattle, the biological markers of desperation. But in several farmhouses, and the personal possessions were found arranged neatly, not scattered in panicked departure, set down, ordered, as if someone had tidied up before leaving or before whatever happened to them. Did any Norse Greenlanders survive by integrating with Inuit communities? Genetic studies of some Greenlandic Inuit populations have found markers consistent with European admixture predating later colonial contact, though the evidence remains contested. And did the last Norse Greenlanders walk out of their farmhouses, close the door behind them, and choose the ice? Or did something else come through first? Why did the Norse, a seafaring people with ships within sailing distance, not evacuate? Who arranged the possessions in the empty rooms? And what does it mean that the last written record of an entire civilization is a wedding? The pattern 10 civilizations, 10 silences. The Indus Valley leaving a writing system that 4,000 inscriptions have not unlocked. The Maya departing 15,000 inscribed monuments without a single one explaining why. The Axumites raising 520-ton obelisks and then vanishing into a guardianship no one has been allowed to verify. The Nabataeans dissolving into desert and leaving their water knowledge behind them. Cahokia emptying so completely that its nearest neighbors a century later had no memory it had existed. Skara Brae abandoned in haste so total that the ornaments stayed on the shelves. The ancestral Puebloans walking away from 400 miles of precision roads and the most defensible homes they had ever built. The Khmer leaving a million-person city without a written record of the decision. Easter Island stopping its greatest project mid-cut and losing the only writing system in Oceania before anyone decoded it. And the Norse arranging their possessions neatly in empty rooms with no distress call. No final letter, no account of the end. The mainstream explanations are not wrong. Climate, drought, invasion, trade collapse, agricultural failure. These forces are real. They are documented, and they killed civilizations. But they explain the pressure, not the silence. They account for why a civilization might fail, not for why it left so little record of deciding to go. Not for the buried monuments, the arranged possessions, the mid-cut statues, the final wedding with no follow-up. The pattern across 10 different cultures, 10 different centuries, 10 different corners of the world is not catastrophe. It is intention. Something about the way these societies ended suggests that at least some of them knew it was ending, made choices about how it would end, and either could not or deliberately did not leave the reason behind. The questions they leave us are not comfortable ones. Who gave the order to bury the monuments? Who tidied the farmhouse before the last person left? And who set down the chisel in the quarry? And wherever they went, into jungles, into deserts, into ice, into the populations of civilizations that outlasted them, do the descendants of those decisions still carry any memory of why?